Matthew Evans, a wealthy man in his late 70s, sat alone in his silver Mercedes, his thumb tapping impatiently against the steering wheel. The hum of the air conditioning did little to cut through the sweltering Kentucky heat. Retired and comfortably living off a lifetime of successful business deals and finance, Matthew was used to things going his way. But today was different. He found himself stranded on a stretch of road, the tire of his luxury car flat, far from the comforts of his sprawling mansion on the outskirts of town. A few fruitless attempts to reach roadside assistance left him with a sinking feeling. No help. No signal. He sighed, leaning back in his seat, realizing he would have to wait it out. As Matthew resigned himself to the wait, a flicker of frustration began to rise within him. That's when he noticed a figure walking toward him down the road. A young boy, maybe 13 or 14, wearing a faded t-shirt and scuffed sneakers. He walked with a quiet, determined air, his gaze fixed on the car. Matthew watched as the boy sized up the situation, his eyes narrowing slightly. Without hesitation, the boy gave a polite but confident nod. "Got a flat, sir?" the boy asked, his voice steady and clear. Yes, I do," Matthew replied, a strange mix of relief and unease creeping over him. It had been a while since he'd relied on someone else for help. "I was hoping for a little assistance." "My phone's got no signal out here," Matthew said with a sigh, frustration still lingering. The boy flashed a small, knowing smile. "I can help with that," he replied, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. Without missing a beat, he dropped to his knees by the flat tire. "My grandpa taught me how to change a tire last summer. You got a spare?" Matthew nodded, gesturing toward the trunk. The boy popped it open, then swiftly pulled out the tools he needed, moving with the kind of quiet confidence that seemed well beyond his years. As Matthew watched him work, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of humility creeping in. It had been years since he'd felt this quiet, simple competence. And yet, here was a boy who had it in spades. Matthew wanted to offer the boy something in return, but the young man hardly even glanced up, his attention locked entirely on the tire. The boy worked with the kind of focus that seemed almost effortless. A few minutes later, the boy wiped his hands on his jeans, stood up, and stepped back with a small, satisfied smile. "All done," he said simply. Matthew, still taken aback by the boy's efficiency, reached into his wallet, pulling out a few bills. He extended them toward the boy, his voice warm with gratitude. "Here, take this. I really appreciate your help." But the boy took a step back, raising his hand in refusal. "Thank you, sir," he said politely, his voice soft but firm. "But I don't need anything. I'm just happy to help." Stunned, Matthew stood there, the money still in his hand, watching as the boy turned and began walking away, his figure growing smaller in the distance. With the money still in his hand, Matthew watched the boy turn and walk away, heading down the road. Something about the interaction had struck him deeply, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Alone now, he slowly slipped the bills back into his wallet, then got into the car. As he pulled away, his eyes drifted to the rearview mirror. The boy's figure shrank smaller with each passing mile. For the rest of the drive, Matthew couldn't shake the feeling the boy had left behind. There was a quiet dignity about him, an unspoken self-assurance that wasn't tied to money or privilege, but to something deeper. Something Matthew couldn't name, but felt with surprising clarity. That night, as Matthew sat alone in his lavish home, he found himself unable to shake the image of the boy walking away, his hands empty, but his smile full. Later, Matthew sank into the leather armchair in his study, the room lit only by the dim glow of a desk lamp. Shelves lined with books he rarely opened surrounded him, their spines collecting dust. The only sound in the otherwise silent room was the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. His perfectly prepared steak and asparagus sat untouched on the side table, the aroma barely registering in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy. In his lifetime, Matthew had encountered thousands of people, business partners, investors, employees, colleagues, yet none of them had left him with the kind of unsettling feeling that this stranger had. Business partners, employees, investors. Most of his interactions over the years had revolved around negotiations, favors, and deals. There was always an exchange, always a price, or some unspoken expectation. But this boy, this stranger, had helped him without asking for anything in return, simply out of kindness. Matthew leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip of scotch as the memory of the boy's confident smile replayed in his mind. He didn't look like someone who had much, Matthew thought. The worn shoes, the faded clothes, the dust on his hands, it all told a story. And yet, despite the signs of hardship, the boy carried himself with a kind of integrity that seemed so rare these days. Something that wasn't measured by what you had, but by who you were. The next morning, Matthew couldn't shake the urge to find the boy. He didn't know exactly why, but something inside him felt unfinished. Maybe it was guilt, maybe gratitude, or maybe just curiosity. Whatever it was, it tugged at him, and before he knew it, he was driving down the same stretch of road, scanning the horizon for any sign of the boy. Hours passed. He stopped at gas stations, small diners, anywhere that might have information, asking anyone who would listen if they'd seen a young boy who fit the description. Most people shrugged or shook their heads, but then finally, an older woman behind the counter at a small cafe spoke up. The woman looked up from the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sounds like you're talking about Elijah," she said, her tone warm. "That boy's always helping folks around here. Lives with his mama over in Harlan." "Harlan," Matthew repeated, making a mental note. "Thank you." Harlan was about an hour away, tucked in the foothills of the Appalachians. The drive was picturesque, the winding roads framed by thick forests and rolling hills, but Matthew barely noticed. His mind was racing with questions. What kind of life did this boy lead? What kind of family raised someone with so much quiet strength and integrity? By the time he arrived in Harlan, the town was quiet, almost too quiet. The streets of Harlan were lined with modest homes and small businesses, a stark contrast to the sprawling mansions Matthew was used to. He asked a few locals about Elijah, and after some time, one woman pointed him toward a small house on the edge of town. The house was humble, worn but well kept, with a front porch that sagged slightly under its own weight. Matthew parked his car, but as he sat there for a moment, he hesitated. He wasn't sure what he was even going to say when he knocked. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out and approached the door. It opened almost immediately, revealing a woman in her early 40s. She looked tired but kind, her eyes sharp and curious as she sized him up. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice warm but cautious. "Good morning," Matthew said, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe I met your son yesterday, Elijah, right? He helped me with a flat tire." The woman's expression softened instantly. "That sounds like my Elijah," she said with a small smile. "He's always helping folks around here." "I just wanted to thank him properly," Matthew continued. "He wouldn't accept anything from me yesterday." She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "He's out back. You're welcome to wait." Matthew stepped inside, his eyes taking in the modest surroundings. The furniture was old but well-maintained, a simple yet inviting space. The walls were adorned with family photos and a few hand-drawn pictures that looked like they'd come from a much younger Elijah. It was a far cry from Matthew's own home, with its polished surfaces and expensive artwork. Yet there was something about this space that felt warmer, more alive. He followed her out to the backyard, where Elijah was busy repairing the fence. The boy looked up, surprised to see Matthew. "Hey, mister," Elijah said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you doing here?" Matthew smiled, feeling oddly nervous. "I wanted to thank you again." "You helped me when I really needed it," Matthew said, his voice earnest. "I just couldn't stop thinking about it." Elijah shrugged, his expression easy and genuine. It wasn't a big deal. But to Matthew it was, and he was determined to show it. Elijah leaned against the fence, his gaze fixed on Matthew with quiet curiosity. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The boy's calm demeanor made Matthew feel a little out of place, as though he were the one being judged. "I don't think you realize how big a deal it was," Matthew finally said, breaking the silence. "People don't usually help strangers without expecting something in return." Elijah tilted his head slightly, as if puzzled by the statement. "I don't see it like that," he replied. "If someone needs help and I can do it, why wouldn't I?" Matthew was struck by the simplicity of the boy's logic. He looked past Elijah, his gaze drifting over the yard. The fence was patched together with mismatched wood, the grass uneven and sparse. Behind the house, an old swing set leaned precariously, its chains rusted and broken. It was clear Elijah's family didn't have much, but they made do with what they had. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Matthew said, meaning it. "Your mother must be proud." Elijah grinned, glancing back toward the house. "She works hard. I just try to help out where I can." Matthew was quiet for a moment, absorbing the boy's words. He thought of his own childhood, spent in a house much like this one. His parents had worked tirelessly to make ends meet, teaching him the value of hard work and perseverance. But over the years, he drifted away from those lessons, caught up in the pursuit of wealth and status. Now, standing in this yard, Matthew felt an odd mix of nostalgia and regret. "I'd like to do something for you and your family," he said at last. Elijah straightened up, his expression cautious. "We're okay, mister. We don't need anything." "It's not about need," Matthew insisted. "It's about what's right. You helped me, and I'd like to return the favor." Before Elijah could respond, his mother stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Elijah, you better come inside and wash up before lunch," she called. Then her eyes shifted to Matthew. "Would you care to join us?" "It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome," she said, her voice warm. Matthew hesitated, unaccustomed to such an invitation, but the sincerity in her tone left him no room for excuses. "I'd like that," he said, following her into the house. Inside, the kitchen smelled of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables. The table was small, surrounded by mismatched chairs, but it was set with care. Matthew took a seat, feeling strangely out of place in his tailored suit amidst the humble surroundings. Elijah washed his hands at the sink and joined them. Elijah's easy smile never faltered as they ate, and Matthew found himself drawn into their conversation. Elijah talked about his school, his friends, and his dreams of becoming an engineer. His mother shared stories about the community, speaking with quiet pride about the people who looked out for one another. Matthew listened intently, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. For all his wealth and success, his own home felt cold and empty compared to this modest house, filled with laughter and genuine connection. After lunch, as they cleared the table, Matthew turned to Elijah's mother. "You've done a remarkable job raising him," he said, his voice sincere. "He's got more heart than most people I know." She smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you. He's a good boy, but we've had our struggles. We've learned to appreciate the small things." Matthew nodded, his mind already turning over ideas. He didn't want to overstep, but he couldn't walk away without doing something for them. This family had given him a gift he hadn't even realized he needed, a reminder of what truly mattered. Matthew left their home that afternoon. With a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years, Matthew drove back to his estate. His mind raced with ideas. This wasn't about charity. It was about honoring the boy's selflessness and the resilience of his family. Elijah and his mother deserved more than just patched fences and worn furniture. They deserved stability. They deserved recognition for the strength they showed every single day. The next morning, Matthew began making calls. Lots of them. He reached out to old colleagues, contractors, and suppliers. By midday, a plan was set in motion. Within a week, trucks and workers were pulling up to Elijah's house. Matthew stood on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, directing the crew with efficiency as they unloaded supplies. Elijah and his mother stood nearby, visibly stunned. "You didn't have to do this," Elijah's mother said, her voice quivering with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "We've managed fine on our own." Matthew turned to her, his expression soft but determined. "You've done more than manage," he said quietly. "You've thrived, and you gave me something I didn't even realize I was missing. Let me give back." Elijah remained unusually silent, standing next to his mother, his brow furrowed in deep thought. Matthew crouched down slightly to meet his eye, giving the boy a steady, reassuring look. "You taught me something, Elijah," Matthew said, his voice sincere. "Helping people isn't about money, it's about showing up. And I want to show up for you." Over the next several weeks, the house underwent a remarkable transformation. The sagging porch was replaced with sturdy wood, the roof repaired, and the rusty swing set in the backyard replaced with a shiny new one. Inside, the walls were freshly painted, the floors polished to a gleaming shine, and the kitchen upgraded with modern appliances. At first, Elijah tried to help with the renovations, hauling planks and sweeping up debris, his hands eager to contribute. But Matthew gently insisted he take a break. "Let us do this," Matthew said, his tone warm but firm. "You've already done more than enough. Your job," Matthew said with a smile, "is to enjoy being a kid for a little while." But even so, Elijah couldn't resist sneaking out to watch the crew work. His eyes lit up with curiosity as he observed them measure, cut, and build. One of the workers, a burly man named Joe, noticed Elijah's interest and with a grin invited him to help measure wood planks. Before long, Elijah was asking questions about tools, construction techniques, and how everything came together. His enthusiasm was contagious, and the crew, sensing his genuine excitement, made space for him to get involved. From a distance, Matthew watched, a warm sense of pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt something deep and genuine. Matthew stood back, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose, something deeper than just business. The boy's energy, that spark of curiosity, reminded him of the ambition he once had, before life had become a blur of boardrooms, deadlines, and stock portfolios. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the project was nearing its completion. Elijah's family stood together on the porch, taking in the transformation. The house that had once sagged with age now stood tall and proud, every detail a reflection of the love and hard work that had gone into it. Elijah's mother turned to Matthew, her voice choked with emotion. "This isn't just a house anymore," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "It's a home. I don't know how we can ever thank you." Matthew shook his head, his tone gentle. "You already have." "You reminded me of what life is supposed to be about," Matthew said, his voice carrying the weight of a truth he had only just rediscovered. "Family, connection, and purpose. I think I'm the one who should be thanking you." The final day of the renovation project felt more like a celebration than anything else. Neighbors, who had been quietly watching the transformation from their windows, stopped by to see the changes for themselves. They brought with them small gifts, freshly baked bread, jars of homemade jam, and even a potted plant. Elijah's laughter filled the air as he raced around the yard, proudly showing off the new swing set and the freshly painted rooms inside. The house, once tired and worn, now radiated with life and love. Matthew stood on the front porch, watching it all unfold, a quiet smile on his face. He didn't need to say another word. The warmth of the moment said it all. Leaning against the sturdy new railing, Matthew watched the scene unfold before him. He hadn't felt this kind of joy in years, simple, unfiltered joy that came from seeing others truly thrive. Elijah's mother approached, a cup of iced tea in hand. She offered it to him with a gentle smile. "You've done more than fix a house," she said softly. "You've given us hope, and I think you found something for yourself too." Matthew took a sip, nodding slowly. "I have," he admitted, his gaze drifting over the yard. "I spent so many years chasing things I thought mattered, money, status, influence, but none of it feels like this. None of it compares. None of it ever filled me the way this has," Matthew said, his voice softer now, the weight of his words settling in. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Elijah joined them on the porch, his energy still as boundless as ever. He looked at Matthew, his expression serious but filled with curiosity. "Mr. Matthew," he began, his voice thoughtful, "I've been thinking a lot about what you did for us. I want to do something like that one day. I want to help people too." Matthew placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, his tone steady and reassuring. "You already are, Elijah. Your kindness set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that." The three of them sat in silence, watching as the sky shifted from gold to deep orange, the air cooling with the promise of evening. The warmth of the day lingered, but there was something deeper now, and warmth born of connection, gratitude, and a shared sense of purpose. When it was time for Matthew to leave, Elijah and his mother walked him to his car. The boy's wide grin and his mother's tearful smile were etched into Matthew's memory as he drove away. As he pulled away, he realized this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in all their lives. The weeks that followed brought more changes. Elijah's newfound curiosity about construction blossomed into a full-blown passion. Matthew arranged for Elijah to spend time shadowing the workers who had helped renovate the house. Elijah absorbed every bit of knowledge, eager to learn. And in turn, Matthew found himself returning to Harlan again and again. Each visit felt less like a trip and more like a return home. He no longer felt like an outsider in their lives. He was part of something bigger now. And for the first time in years, he was content. The story came full circle, ending where it had begun, in a small town with a big heart. It all started with one act of kindness from a young boy, and it had sparked something much greater than either of them could have imagined. It reminded an old man of life's greatest lesson. It's not about what you have, but what you give.